Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Commercial Real Estate Secrets. Today, our guest is Dee Fischer. She's the founder of Fischer Professional Group, and she has been in the dental industry for 36 years. So she's got a ton of knowledge, a ton of wisdom, and I'm really excited to have her on the show. So Dee, welcome, and thanks for giving us your time today.
Thanks for having us, Austin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you are welcome. Cool. So, yeah, tell the audience, tell us a little bit about how you got started. Obviously 36 years is enough time to learn a lot, all the ins and outs, but like what made you get into this industry originally?
Well, my dad had a very good friend that was a dentist in Wallington, New Jersey, way back when. And he said, why don't you go try it out and you become a secretary, sit at the front desk, or become a dentist? And having a European dad, he really wanted me to become the doctor. So I went in and I fell in love with it instantly and said, oh, this will be good for me. I decided at that point, maybe, dental school would be an option for me. But just once I started dealing with the patients and watching the business side, it really intrigued me. I was like, this is something I think I could really do.
Okay. All right. So your dad was a dentist essentially. And so growing up, you got to watch him do that as, his career. So like when you were young, I mean, was it something, was there a positive light shed on it? Like, did he complain about work? I mean, obviously you want to get into it. So he's doing
Oh,
something right.
yeah. Well, it was my dad's best friend, and he was like a dad to me. Never complained. Loved his patients. Loved his patients. Loved going there. Just was happy to take care of people.
Hmm.
And the funny story he used to tell me is his dad wanted him to be a doctor, and he used to say, "I don't want to kill anybody. If I just take out a tooth, because all his brothers were cardiologists, and he said, if I just take out a tooth, it really can't hurt anybody." But the man idolized his patients and loved them and cared for them. And I think that was the compassionate side that really attracted me to this.
Okay.
I was kind of with him. Let's not kill anybody.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So it wasn't your dad, he's your dad's best friend. Okay. So, and then this made you decide to go into dental school, right? Like that was essentially the main influencer in your life. And then how did you decide where to go and what was that process like?
Well, Dad wanted me to stay close to home with three brothers, and he's just like, let's stay close to home. So Fairleigh Dickinson had a program, and I was looking at Fairleigh Dickinson, and I said, well, this will be good. I'll start out there. I'll start, my career out there. So I went to Fairleigh. And the funny story about Fairleigh Dickinson, they decided to close their dental school. And I realized really quickly, maybe dental wasn't for me, but the business side would be for me. So switched gears and went into business and just loved it. And I was able to mesh the two of them together, which really gave me, I felt an up on understanding both the clinical and the operation side. So, but I love Fairleigh Dickinson. It was a great ride. But again, everybody was crying when the school was closing. And I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. I can really do what I want to do.
You're like, this is my sign that I've been looking
Yeah,
for.
exactly.
So, it's interesting that you were more drawn towards the business side because there's kind of like a pretty big split between the people who just prefer to practice, kind of chair side, and those who are really entrepreneurial or on the business side of things. So, what do you think shaped you to be like that? Did anything happen when you were younger? Did you try and start a business at all? Like, why do you think there was that difference there?
I think the difference was I realized very quickly that I really like to talk to people and communicate and
Mm.
have that ongoing conversation. And when you have a drill or a suction tip in someone's mouth, that's not going to happen. And I realized really quickly, I'm like, I don't know if I'm really going to like this. Love the patients, but I used to, my eyes kept going to almost like that front office, kept looking at the front office, say, well, I really don't want to sit behind the desk, but I watched how transactions were happening, how the doctors were able to take care of people and also have a business. And my dad was an entrepreneur. He opened businesses. He flipped real estate back in the day. So I guess it was just ingrained with me. And all I kept saying is, I can do this. I can make it very successful and still care for patients.
Yeah, that's huge. Having a dad who's an entrepreneur. Did he instill any beliefs in you, like as a child, that you think helped you on this path?
Yes, he told me, he said, you always have integrity. Whatever you do in a business deal, be able to put your head on the pillow at night. And it was something that's very, very ingrained with me and always do the right thing. And I watched his business flourish. He was kind of funny. I tell people all the time, he started a limousine service in New York City. And he used to drive, entertainers around, and he would take, if we had five kids, he was very into the Elks organization and taking care of kids. So there was always that compassionate side to my dad. and he mixed it with business. And he always told me, if you take care of your customer, you will always be successful. And so, and the biggest thing was for every one of his children, remember when you go to bed at night, put your head on the pillow and make sure you could do it the right way. So
Yeah,
that is
that's
my
good.
favorite.
Yeah, and just I can imagine just seeing that too, seeing him do his own thing, seeing him take risks, seeing him be successful at it. I'm sure you saw him make mistakes, but song that he overcome them. I mean, that's got to just help your mindset so much too.
Yeah, it instilled, I can remember snowstorms in New York City, and he still would get the limo out and he'd go pick him up. I tell people this story all the time. One time he got me, he said, "Come on, you have to come with me." And I said, "Why?" And it was about 7 o'clock on a Friday night. He's like, "You have to go to Radio City Music Hall and someone can't show up, but you're going to go in the room and you're going to help these two people." And it was Frank Sinatra and Shirley MacLaine.
No
And
way.
I had to get their dressing rooms ready in Radio City Music Hall. And there I am. And I remember seeing all the liquor in the rooms and all the teas and things. I'm like, this is pretty interesting. But, Dad never said no. Dad said, this is an obligation that you have. So if he grabbed one of our kids, he would always make it work. And I think that was a great learning lesson for all of us.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting. I love diving into people's stories and their backgrounds to find out things. And for me personally, my dad was an entrepreneur as well, and I think it was just the mindset that created that helped me, because so many people have limiting beliefs, right? Or they think that they need a lot of money, and they think that they need to be born with a silver spoon in their hand in order to make it, and the world's just unfair. But like, I mean, the best thing my dad ever gave me was a mindset, an open mindset, belief in myself. I mean, he introduced me to the psychology of winning, which is like a motivational book by Dennis Wheatley, like in 17. And I loved it. I was like, why haven't you shown me this stuff earlier? And so, that led down a path of like consuming a lot of self-development books, with Darren Hardy and Zig Ziglar a little bit. And then, Tony Robbins. And then, you can obviously go very broad, wide stream, kind of like motivational, and that has its place, but it can be overdone. And then all the way down to like the very nuanced, like, somebody such as Russell Brunson, who's specifically for marketing, right? But they combine that with the motivational flair. But like just that understanding of the world, like the education that you can get is at your fingertips. I mean, it's almost free. If it's not free, it's way, 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 way less than a college degree or going to dental school. But yeah, understanding like, hey, like, the knowledge is out there. If I'm willing to put in the hard work to apply it, like you can essentially do anything that you want. And I mean, we live in the most prosperous time that we've ever seen.
And I think it goes back to what you're saying is the work ethic, put the time in. And I think that, that's a really important part of what any of us do today, have that work ethic. And if you put in the time, my dad carried a 50 cents piece in his pocket and he said, as long as I have this, I'm the richest man. I have, two hands, I can work. And I can support my family. I always feel wealthy if I have this in my pocket, and I carry his 50 cents piece to
Oh
this day.
wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. That's cool. That's so cool. Yeah. So all right, you're in dental school, essentially closes down. You take that as a sign or as a blessing. What was your next move from there?
From there, I said, well, let me learn some business. Let me really get myself educated. Started taking business courses, started to dabble in real estate at that point. And I said, well, let me understand how this all works. Because my dad had flipped homes. He used to buy a home and keep it, would
Mm,
renovate it. And I had met a young dentist at that point, and he's like, I want to buy some land and I want to have my own practice. And we said, let's do this together. It was a learning experience together. And so we went down that road and actually learned a lot by doing that. And that was my first experience. The first thing I learned really quickly was what pad ready meant and what it didn't mean when
mm.
you're buying real estate. Didn't realize that, we thought this was the greatest deal in the world. We had this piece of property. He closed on it. And the next thing we knew, it was like $60,000 in soft costs, meaning
Wow.
we had to pull the electricity, we had to pull the water, we had to have soil. So the great deal that his friend got us wasn't the greatest deal of all. But we said, we'll make a positive out of it, and we'll keep it, and we'll build it up. And the next time we go buy land, we'll really understand what we're buying. So, as much as you read and you learn, as we've all learned this, our friends trying to help us, but he wasn't versed in what we really had to do. He just sold us land. That's what he did. No
Yeah.
fault to him. He thought he was giving us a great deal till we realized it, like I said, the soft costs were going to be astronomical.
Wow.
Um,
So that
so
was
we
your tuition in the School of Hard Knocks.
you got that right. For sure.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Yeah, you look at the different pads, like different undeveloped land, and they can vary a lot in price. And yeah, if you don't understand that, it just looks like some people are trying to rip you off. But yeah, there's a lot of groundwork that goes into it, right? Like laying the groundwork for the plumbing and the electrical, and even just flattening it, like all that sort of thing. You really take it for granted until you physically go and try to do it yourself.
Yeah, especially when someone tells you, well, now we have to, bring in the civil engineers and we have to do retention and we have to, and you're like, what? Oh, well, there's a stream behind here. You didn't realize that. So there's another $30,000. But you quickly learn that, you quickly learn what a traffic study is. You quickly learn what a soil test is, all those things that you need to learn. I look back at it now and say it was one of the best things that I did. At that time, you're ingrained in it and you're thinking, this is just going to be a cash cow, right?
Mhm.
But it took me through life in a good way because now I've learned quickly on my first experience, don't do that again. So I think it has saved me millions of dollars down the road.
Wow.
So now it's a blessing. And I can
Yeah.
look and say that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, so in that situation, obviously you came out of pocket a lot more than you had intended. Were you able to successfully help him? Were you co-partnering in it, or were you just assisting him, and was he able to successfully start a practice and make it profitable?
We co-partnered. And then once we opened up the practice, I sold him back the real estate. That was kind of our deal, what we were going to do. And we actually became very successful. It took us 3 years. I will tell you that it took us 3 years. We would make a profit every month. It wasn't as big as we thought, but we had incurred, like I said, $60,000 worth of soft costs that we didn't realize. And we wanted to pay that down. It was just our focus, get it off the principal. But after 3 years, became very profitable. He ended up opening three other offices, which he did very well. And we decided at that point, we weren't going to do ground up anymore. We were going to look at acquisitions,
Yeah.
kind of what he just wanted to be safe. But then, you're going to an acquisition and you're going to lease negotiation, right? You're going into what's an assignable lease. People don't understand what these terms mean. Can you negotiate an assignable lease? What does it all look like? But it was interesting ride. I think again, going through the lease process the first time, learning how to negotiate it, learning what those terms mean, what's a AAA lease, what's we were learning on the run here, but we learned quickly. We were able to find some good spaces, and again, it's either, in my mind, it's always been, if you have a location that isn't as great, you're going to spend more marketing, right? If you
Yeah.
have a great location, you might spend less on marketing. So we kind of did. We had our fancy Excel sheet at that time. We thought we were really sophisticated, and we crunched numbers. And we said, you know what? We looked at demographics, we looked at competition, and we looked at what was lease going to cost us over 5 years, 10 years. Was it viable? And we added all the numbers up, and it came out positive. So we did it.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I know you and I were talking about Emmett Scott earlier. He's got a quote that I love. It's like, your rent should be part of your marketing budget, right? Like it should be factored into, okay, how many patients am I going to get if I go to this location and pay a little bit more versus a location that's a lot less, but it's recessed or it's out of the way or nobody's ever going to see it. And of course, in order to know that, you got to know your cost of acquisition, right? For a new patient, you also have to be able to predict how much patients return visits are going to have. But I'm curious, like, how did you guys decide on that? Like, did you know your cost of acquisition at the time? And then how would you determine how many new patients you would get from a good site versus a bad site?
So we would always, like I said, we would always look at the competition around us. And honestly, we did what we called cold calling.
Mm,
And we would call up and see how long it would take us to get into that dental office.
nice.
If they said 2 weeks out, we knew that it was probably a very good center to go to. If they said we can get you the same day, we would kind of say, well, let's really look at this.
Yeah.
Yes, we worked the numbers. I am, good friends with Emmett. Emmett and I lecture together and for the DEO. We're kind of on stage a lot and saying, we're always talking about that, make sure that you understand that this is part of your rent. So putting those numbers together, it's not really hard. It's understanding your formulas and looking at, what are you really looking at when it comes to the real estate today, acquisition buy, have you done your demographics? So, you could go to a very rural area, right? And you can do very, very well as a dentist, right? And your cost of acquisition might be a little bit more because you're in a rural area, you have to draw from different counties, right? And where you're in a more populated area, might not cost you as much. There might be more visibility. You're on the road. People are seeing your sign. And it just goes into, know your business. Is what I tell people all the time. Know what you're buying. And you've been on the investment side, something that looks really pretty might not be as pretty as you think it is. So make sure that you're doing those numbers. What's your rate of return? And again, it goes back to something that Em and I always we talk about: know your customer that's going to come in the door, and know what you think your average customer is going to spend. And you cannot judge a book by its cover, but there's trends. There's trends within areas. There's trends within a practice. And if you learn them pretty quickly, you could be, and you're pulling in the right customer into your business, you'll do very well.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's great. Especially because you can have different niches, right? Like you could be saturated with pediatric style dentist that and you might be doing traditional or PPO, right? And it's like, so just because that one area has a lot, or it could be flipped. It doesn't matter. But there are different nuances. However, like, it's important to look at, because if you're all practicing the exact same style of dentistry within that area, like you said, they can get you in the same day. That it's
Mhm.
people like to think that their business is very unique, even if it's like the same thing, right? Like, I was in the fitness industry for a long time, and I had several gyms, and so I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, like, our thing is unique. This is like, it's a circuit, and there's no class times, and we're not really competition with anybody else because we have this special thing. But it's like, well, no, that's not true. You have a unique feature, obviously, and that allows you to stay in business. But to think that you don't have competition is just very, very naive. So we all have competition in one form or another. And so, yeah, the more time you spend understanding it, and then B, researching it to find out exactly where it is just going to pay off in the long run.
Mhm.
So, okay. So at this stage in your story, you had helped this guy grow to about 3 locations, and then you decided you were going to all do acquisition after that. And so, even though when you're doing acquisition, though, you can still acquire the real estate sometimes. How did you guys handle that situation? Were there ever? I'm sure there were dentists that owned their locations that wanted to sell that with you guys. Did you have a preference one way or another?
We always wanted to buy the real estate. We tried to within 2 years. I'll tell you a great story in Kissimmee. We were purchasing an office. We were going to turn it into dental. It was in a medical building, and it was a sublease. So we went to the owners and said, we really want this, and they wanted to say at that time $20 a square foot. We went into the last meeting, went to negotiations, and I said to the owner of the building, I said, I'll tell you what, this is a sublease. You really need us to take this over. I did my research. It's 10 years. I want to pay $10 a square foot. I want to leave out of here with a $30,000 check. You want me to take this, but the most important thing is I want to set a purchase price and I want to buy the building in 3 years. And they all went into the room. And meanwhile, this poor dentist is having a heart attack. They came back and honestly, they handed us a $30,000 check and said, yes, we will sell you the building. But we named the price right then and there.
Wow.
So I always tell people, don't be surprised. Sometimes if you ask, you'll get what you want, or you can negotiate what you want, right? On a space. Because you don't know what's happening at the investor's life at that time. You don't know if a trust is owning it, if they want to let it go. There's all kinds of things that can happen. But I tell people all the time, do your research when it comes to things like that, and always find out whenever I'm leasing a space, the first question I ask, is this space saleable? Am I going to be able to buy it? What do we look like? And if it's a definite no, then I have to put that into my equation and say, do I want to do that? Or if it's a possibility, do I negotiate it now? Or do I wait? I like to always have that option. Sometimes you can't. But I think knowing going in is really smart.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And the biggest argument really against owning the real estate is that it ties up a lot of your capital. And so,
Mhm.
especially as a DSO, I mean, your number one goal is growth because it's so competitive. I mean, so many people are breaking into this industry, and you got to have cash. It's becoming more expensive to buy practices. So, how do you balance buying the locations, allocating the capital for the real estate versus acquiring a practice? Or did you kind of was that your role? Was the real estate, was the two separate funds at the time?
It was two separate funds, but it goes according to a lot of the DSOs. They have a philosophy. And they set out the projections every year, and they set a 3 year, a 5 year, 10 year plan. So it really it starts with the philosophy. Do we want to be a buyer of real estate? Do we want to be a partial buyer, or do we want to just not even touch real estate? And once you decide which road you're going to go down, that's where you become either aggressive and you start talking to your funding people. You start talking to private equity. What does it look like? What's going into what fund? And you're very budget conscious at that point. You're very, you know that this is the budget. This is what we're going to spend for the year in real estate. This is what we're going to spend for practices. And honestly, I always tell people, time you hire the best negotiator there is.
Mhm.
Because that will save you dollars over and over, or you bring a consultant in, not because I'm a consultant, but you bring in somebody that really knows their business. Like if I told you, Austin, I need to go negotiate this for me, I need you to look at this. You're an expert in your field. And I always tell people there's experts in their fields for a reason, and use them. So I really think it goes back to, what is the DSO, or what is the private doctor? What does this philosophy look like? And are you leaving a legend? Are you doing a DSO? There's all kinds of factors that I think really go into it. But once you make your decision, hire that expert to negotiate for you, or that expert to buy that land for you, because one little bump in the road, as you know, Austin, can cost you a lot of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, a lot of people will pick somebody to help them with their site selection, their site location, or a broker that's just like a brother-in-law or cousin or whatever, and they have almost zero experience. And then if you pick the wrong location, it's so expensive. It doesn't matter what business you're in, but dental is the worst. It's one of the most expensive. So yeah, it's like you said, pick someone who's an expert in that field. To us, how do we define expert? We just say, hey, at least have 10 deals in that industry. So in dentistry, it's like pick somebody who's done at least 10 deals in the dental industry, not somebody, this is their first one or second one or third one, because they got to learn. We want to help people, but they don't have to learn on you, right? Like your business doesn't have to be a charity for those types of people that are learning. You can help them in other ways. It doesn't have to be take them out to lunch, take them out to dinner, give them $100, whatever. You don't have to let them like decide, like get this fat commission from putting you in the wrong location.
And I always tell people all the time, get references. And my biggest thing is I do a drive-by from the references. I don't just call. I'll do a drive-by and say, okay, what does this look like? What does this dental office look like? Where's it located? Because you can call and get a reference, say it's great, but if you drive 3 of their references and they're close enough and it's really not in the areas you want to be in, you want to really think about, does the philosophies match? Does it really look like this is going to be the right person to do that? I think there's a lot of different ways to do research that people don't. Like I said, I cold call,
Mm.
what does this practice look like? I'm looking at their websites. I get those references and I really dig into those references. And I'm looking at, honestly, quality of the reference, because I think that's a big deal in real estate. I think,
Yeah.
you know that. I mean, look, you could educate me, but that you could have someone that says, well, I sold 10 houses, but what did those 10 houses really look like? So I always tell people, dig, dig, dig.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's perfect. All right. So now how long were you with this partner? Were you guys at this stage? It sounds like, the goal was acquire the dental practice and also acquire the real estate as quickly as you can later on. That was a big part of it. How did that shake out as you continue to move forward?
We moved forward and we bought about 10, and that was in the Northeast. And then unfortunately my dad got ill and I came to
Mm.
Florida, and met up with a group and said, we just grew. I went into that group and we just said, we're going to grow, and we grew, and we became a public company. Bought back our business after 6 months, and started growing again. And then about 15 years in, we all just said, we're about done, and we're going to, it's going to sell. And we're going to move on and do other things. And sure enough, that's what happened. It was a great Cinderella ride. From there, I was like home for about 2, 3 weeks. The doctors were calling me, can you come help me with my practice? Can you build my practice? And all of a sudden I bought a design build company. And there you
Nice.
go. Yeah. And actually it was in Oviedo, Florida. And we did many design builds across the state.
And can you explain what that is for the listeners?
Sure. When you do a design build company, it means you design the facility and you build the facility. And that instance, most times you're finding the land or you're finding the property for them. You're showing them efficiencies, how it could work. It's a whole business plan. It's basically turnkey. But I went the extra step. I decided to tie a consulting contract to it. I hired a team for them. I trained team. They had the turnkey when I actually walked in. So it was really, really kind of unique in its own way. But it worked really well because most of the doctors were very successful. They went and bought 1, 2, and 3 practices.
Mm.
And, it goes back to when you're looking at a lease property, how efficient can you make that space? Because sometimes you have walls that you have to deal with. There's things you can't take down. But I look at it, and this is something that, Emmett and I have talked about. How much should an operatory produce? How many operatories can you get out of this space? What does it really look like? What's its max? And I tell people all the time, when you're looking at property, you can max out that property. Don't be open 9 to 5. You could run a double shift. You have fixed cost. There's all kinds of ways. If you can't build 7 operators, but you have 5, how do you make those 5 work like 7? Well, you extend hours. There's many ways that you could do it. So, but design build teaches you, your limitations if you're leasing a facility and there's walls and things you can't move, or it teaches you, go buy a shell and get what you really want. So, I think design build is fun. I think you
Mhm.
either have you have to be very creative or you have a blank space. So what better than that?
Yeah, no, that's great. And design build can encompass both buying the plot of land where nothing's there and building it completely up, and buying an existing building and kind of doing a build to suit, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think, like I said, many ground ups. We did, many ground ups. We Gainesville, Florida, Sebastian, Florida. We've done larger facilities, all the way to design builds all through Florida. And then, went into different states. But yes, it was, to me, that's a dream job. If you could take someone and say, here's a plot of land, and in 5 years, this is where you're going to be, and this is what it's going to look like. And sometimes that dentist or that person can't see that vision, but you can. And to carry out that vision with them is just an exciting trip. It's just, I tell people all the time, that's my passion, just to see them go from a plot of land all the way to, wow, we have a viable, great practice, and
Mm.
now we can get a second one.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So now, are you more on the de novo side and the acquisition side, or is it a combination?
It's a combination. Right now, I'm actually doing a build out in Oklahoma. We have a build out going up in Chicago, working all across the nation and advising them. And then we're acquiring. Actually, today I'm going to look at a practice to acquire when we're done with our podcast. So I'm
Nice.
working in both worlds, because there's opportunity in both. So why not?
Yeah. And when you say acquire, you're talking about the real estate, right? You're talking about the building. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's great. So tell us the story about the guys that you helped early on in their career. We were talking about it earlier. It was a successful land acquisition refi kind of deal.
Yeah. Well, we actually, the best story that I have that I love is that we took 2 young dentists. They were out of school. They really didn't even know each other, but their dads were dentists. We did, that was just a quick story on that is we were able to get property pretty cheap, and then we sold off something, and the principal was low. So that's the first one. But the second one was where we
Were you
were.
identified, like you identified that early on, like you said, hey, this is a large plot of property. We only need small of it, but we only need a small amount of it, but it's such a great deal. We can afford to essentially purchase the whole thing, subdivide it into what we need, and then sell the excess.
Yes, and they
And
were starry-eyed. They were like, "What are you talking about?" But we did it, and like I said, in 2 years, actually, that building won an award, and in 2 years, they were just, pretty much out of debt with that building because they sold off one condo to an orthodontist, and paid down a lot of their principal. And before you know it, we were very much on a budget. We paid down the building, and to this day, I still work with them, and they have 4 units. They're collecting rents off those units, and it's a general dentist with 8 hygienists. It's a pedo office, it's an endo office, and it's an orthodontic, and they self-refer. So really not much marketing.
nice.
It worked out, works out really well. But as far as refining, you bring up a good, I think in this time, I am telling everyone to really look at their documents right now because money looks good right now. And make sure that if you're going for a refi, can you buy now? What does this all look like to you? So I have a lot of doctors that are working with their banks right now and looking at that. I mean, I've been telling them for a year, look at interest rates. They're never going to get better in my mind, right now. So if
Mhm.
you buy or you could refi, do that. So most of the dentists have gone down that road with me. We've been able to save them lots and lots of dollars, and now we're buying a second office.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's great. And yeah, I want to talk a little bit more detail about the project because I think, theoretically, a lot of people understand it like, oh, that's the goal, buy a building, buy my location, pay down the debt, have free rent, essentially. But there's a lot of steps to that. And I think people can get hung up in those steps along the way. So essentially, you guys identified an area, you identified the trade area you wanted to be first, right? And then, so secondly, you looked for the land that was available to purchase, and there's a little bit more land than you needed. So did you sell that empty plot of land, or did you develop it first and then sell part of it?
We developed it and then sold it. And
Okay.
I just think it would, for us, it was an easy model. And I kept telling them, I said, listen, this is going to pay off twofold for you. Number one, you're gonna have less debt and you could go reinvest in other things, which they did. We actually opened up a brewery company. That was pretty
That's
fun.
great.
Yes, we opened up a brewery company. But yes, I told them, I said, don't look at it as just land. Let's make it really valuable and how it will be valuable to you. And if you can develop this and sell this, put a condo on it, whatever you want, it's easier for a buyer to come in and just purchase that, right? A lot of buyers just don't want to purchase land at the time that we were doing it.
Yeah.
So we developed it, and we were really smart because the way we laid out the property, when you're laying out property, people don't understand a lot of times, or I find dentists don't understand. You have to have so many parking spaces. You have to have all these things that you have to have ADA rules, and all of a sudden they're buying space. They're, wait a second, we don't have enough parking spaces for what we want. So we really planned it out. And I tell all the doctors all the time, when you're even if you're going into a lease space, how many parking spaces are you getting? What does this look like? What does your growth look like? Because if you're starting out with 4 operatories and you grow to 6, you need more parking. And I tell people all the time, I said, you have to really look at that when you're negotiating leases, when you're buying property. Make sure that you have all those things, those bells and whistles, because what's the worst thing that happens? You pull into the dental office and there's no parking, right? And do you really want to go back, and you're circling certain, do you really want to go back to it has nothing to do with the dentist, right? Because we are creatures of convenience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good point. And part of the problem too, is when you go to look at some land, if you're going to buy land, you really need a minimum amount of square footage to develop. And so like an individual dental office that takes up, like, let's just say 3,000 square feet or 2,500 square feet, it doesn't really make sense for you to buy the land and develop for yourself a single building, because like we talked about earlier, the soft costs, the development costs, the getting the land ready, in order to start, is just so expensive. And a lot of the times those are fixed rates, regardless of how big the square footage is. And typically you can develop around like 10,000 square feet per acre, more or less. And so in this situation where you had the success story of the 2 dentists, was that part of the plan? Was like, okay, we know we need to hit a minimum, like how many acres was the land, and then how many square feet did you end up developing?
It was almost 3 acres, and we developed 50, we put in a 15,000 square foot building.
Hmm.
And we wanted excess parking, to say the least, because we knew we are going to do a refer only property. And it's worked out, like I said, extremely well. And I'm with you. I tell people all the time, I'm not a fan of standalone buildings. I'm just not my thing. It doesn't make it right or wrong. But what I like to do is tell people, okay, let's look at this site. And if we could build 3 properties here, we could, you're going to have 2 rents coming in, right? Those 2 rents are going to pay your mortgage. So you're basically renting for free, right? And there's all things with taxes and things that you can do differently if you own properties that are not standalone buildings. So I also tell people all the time, go talk to a good CPA. What does this look like if I buy a standalone building? Or what does it look like if I buy, if I have 3 condos, let's just say, how does that look like? What does that look like tax wise? Because, people don't even realize sometimes about cost segregation and things that they can do with buildings, and how it impacts their tax flow. So there's 3 experts that I bring in when I'm buying. I bring in a very good CPA. I'll bring in someone that's really knowledgeable about land, and I'll bring in someone that's really knowledgeable about running a team and making that business successful pretty quickly. So to me, those are key things. But a lot of people just talk to their CPA about, how am I going to afford this? How am I getting the money? But there has to be a larger conversation. And it goes back to, know your property, know the customers that are coming in the door, but also know your liabilities, and know what your profit center is going to look like. Because how many dentists really, or anybody in business, think about what's the tax implication if I'm buying this property and it's a standalone? People really don't think about that sometimes.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's good. And so, yeah, again, it's one of those things in theory, you say a strategy like that and everybody thinks, oh, sweet, like, let me do that. But then in practicality, it becomes difficult to execute. And mainly one of the things is actually filling the space, right? And
Mhm.
so in this situation, you developed, it sounds like a 3 unit, 15,000 square foot building. And so you already had two of the tenants accounted for with the build, right? So essentially you're 66% covered, but you had 1/3 that was somewhat exposed to risk. How did you know you were going to rent that out quickly? Did you set that up ahead of time, or did you kind of just go through with the purchase and then put it up on the market, hoping that somebody would reach out to you guys?
Well, I sold it before it was built. How attractive is it to know that you have a general dentist, that two general dentists are going to build to eight hygienists? That was our business plan. Have a pedo that was going to be in there and have an endodontist. And all I did was send out a letter to four orthodontists that were in the area. And guess what?
Mm.
They bought it immediately. It was sold before it was built. And that's kind of, that's kind of strategic planning. But, they were bidding on it. It was like a bidding war because they wanted to be there. Again, you have how many families are going to walk through a general dentist office, eight hygienists all day long sending you ortho down the road and a pedo sending you ortho. So we actually ended up with a bidding war.
Wow, that's great. So what kind of return did you get on that? And you don't have to disclose actual numbers, but just in terms of like percentages.
Actually, it was very high return, to say the least. It was a very, very high return,
Is it
and
multiple
and uh,
on
and because there was a fluke with the bank, but I don't want to go into that. They wrote papers, and their percentages on the paper were correct, and it was just during that time where the banking industry was under scrutiny, and people were rushing through things. So our return was really astronomical on this piece, and I always say that's a Cinderella story. But also, you could take what we learned from it is, if you develop and you have a long-term plan and you're in a great place to develop that and you start marketing it and putting up for sale before it's even built, a lot of times if you really sit down and take time and have those meetings and you can say this is going to be a self-referring property, you actually could do very, very well. And I think sometimes people don't go to that step. They're just, I'm going to buy the property, I'm going to market, I'm going to put it up. But why not market it before it's even built?
Yeah.
A lot of developers try to do that,
Once
but
the leases are signed, right? Like you had the leases signed before you marketed it, right?
absolutely, and the bank just
Yeah.
loved it. The bank just loved it. So,
Yeah.
and that's the way people don't, sometimes look at that. But I think it's a good way to look at when you're buying property. And if you could tell a story for the property and say, this is what it's going to look like. And, you all meeting beforehand and say you're condoing out and you all have the same philosophy on that property, actually can do well.
Mm. Just curious, was this location, would you consider it office or retail?
Office.
Office. Okay. And then, yeah, had enough, I guess people were coming out there that had enough self-referral to make up for maybe a little bit less drive-by traffic than it would have had if it was retail.
Yeah, and I did it as office of dentist because there weren't too many dentists in that area at the time. And we were the first ones in, and I looked at the demographics and said, the average median income here is about 50,000. People need dentistry, so let's go with this. And we did, and I'm telling you, within 3 months, we were pretty packed. It was quite interesting to say the least. But again, you were looking around, it was developing. There were houses going up. People needed a dentist.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so tell us a little bit about how you tie in the consulting to, building these new locations, these self builds.
So what I do is, I sit with the doctors and say, let's get a business plan. Let's look at where you want to be in a year. Let's look at, how do you want to do things? Now, a lot of times they have to stay clinical because they've just taken on a large debt. They want to be clinical and they really don't have the time to oversee the administrative part. So we'll tie a consulting contract to say, okay, we'll help you with the business side and also the clinical side because I have coaches that work with me and all of them are doctors, and we can take you through case presentation. We can take you to retention of employees, hiring their employees so they can stay at the chair and really be productive. So I think it's attractive that I'm going to be able to do my dentistry. I'm going to be able to run my business. We have a third set of eyes that are watching everything because we know in the dental field embezzling is large. And I know that I'm going to be safe. And and of course, in a kind way, not egotistical. But when you have, when you have a reputation that 99.9% of the practices has always been successful, they pretty much feel comfortable. So I think that's how we tie it together because they want to hit the ground running at the chair.
Mm. Okay. And sometimes you got to coach them to pump the brakes a little bit.
Yes, exactly. It's like I tell people all the time, especially during the design build, I'm very adamant on having a budget, because a lot of times, people say, "Oh, I really like that light fixture," and I tell people all the time, "That's a pretty light fixture, but you can value engineer it." What does that mean, Dee? Well, you see that light fixture, you could probably go buy that through a contractor. It looks almost the same, might not be the brand, the brand that you're looking at, but it will last just as long, and you'll save $30 a light fixture.
Yeah.
So I always tell people all the time, when you're doing design build, you're looking at saving dollars, but like I said, you want the doctor to go in and really be productive from day one. So setting up consulting will set up your marketing, beforehand. It'll open up your schedule. There's all kinds of things that you can do to help them be successful going in day one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. So, any piece of like, wisdom or advice that you want to impart with new doctors or people who are getting started, maybe some common mistakes that you see?
Sure. What I like to tell, what really drives me or inspires me is the young doctors coming out and the young team members. And what I tell them all the time is don't let anybody tell you you cannot do this. Whether you partner up with a DSO, whether you want to do your own design build, whether you want to be an associate, the biggest thing that I can tell you is have a plan, have a business plan in your mind. Um, Even if you're associate, you want to be the greatest associate. You want to be able to be productive. You want to, be compassionate, take care of your patients all the way through being profitable, right? And I tell them, sit down. It takes about, half hour, write up your vivid vision. What does your business plan look like for your life? And if you start with having a vivid vision for the next 5 years and you keep
Mm.
yourself on track, or if you have to change it, that's okay. At least you have something instead of just going into work every day and not having a plan. And I think entrepreneurs always have a plan, right? Or we think we do.
Yeah.
No, we think it changes constantly. But I think that mindset, Austin, open it up. Look at all your possibilities, and you know what, you're going to fail. But you get up and you start over. If we all didn't fail, we wouldn't be where we were. So expect the failures is what I tell them, but also, like I said, expect things to be positive in your life. And I think that's the biggest thing and I love the young doctors and the young teamers coming out, because like you said, this is a great time. This is
Mm.
I know we're in a pandemic, but there's so much opportunity right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity in, just across the board. Do you feel like the competition in the DSO space is impinging on that opportunity, or do you feel like the field is just so big that you can't stop it?
I think the field is so big. I think, look, you look at dentistry, it's a $50 billion, industry. It's so big. There's enough room for everybody is what I tell people all the time. If you want to be DSO, if you want to be a private doctor, you want to own 3 practices, you want to own 5, there's room for everybody. I always tell people, focus on you. And when you're focusing on you and your business plan and you're really intent on making it work, it's going to work. And if you're failing, get an expert. A lot of times people wait too long to get that expert, but bring them in, join groups like the DEO, the Dental Entrepreneur Organization, find that group that works for you. There's a lot of support system. You just have to ask.
Mm, yeah, that's great. So, yeah, this has been awesome. I think there's been a ton of little nuggets that if people are paying attention can take away from this. What would be the best way to reach out and get in touch if people want to, talk to you more or get more information?
I tell people all the time, I have a website, it's Fischer Professional Group, or the best way is to reach out to my assistant, and her email is so easy. It's Tammy, Tammy at fisherspro.com. But a lot of people know where to find me. And like I said, and I tell people all the time this, Austin, and I will leave you with this. They could call just to ask a question. I am the type that will answer your question to help you. I'm not the type that charges for every little thing. I just don't have to where I'm at in my career. But feel free, reach out, send me an email. I help doctors every single day and team members, and that's what life is about, helping each other.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll leave those in the show notes for people, but just want to make sure I got the spelling right. For everybody listening, TAMMY at Fischer's Pro. That's FISCHERSPRO.com, right?
That's right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, great. Thanks very much. And we look forward to connecting soon.
All right, Austin, have a great day.